Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Small Business Council Presents. I'm Dottie Summerfield Justy. It's my joy to serve as your chair this year. I'm going to introduce Patricia McKinney, my co-chair and right arm in this endeavor. Patricia.
Thank you so much, Dottie, and welcome everyone. At this time, we do want to take that time to really thank our sponsor for our Small Business Council programming, and that is Independent Bank. And today we have with us Linda Barnes, who is the Executive Vice President of Retail Banking. Linda, if you could say a few words.
Yes, and I would get on video so you could see my face, but it keeps telling me it's being stopped by somebody in the world of the host. So anyway.
Tundra can fix that for you. Hang on just a second. We can see your shining face, I think.
There. Good morning, everybody from Independent Bank. I am Linda Barnes, and I get to work with our retail group here at the bank. So I'm extra excited to talk about this topic of leading through crisis, because each one of my managers, myself, get to work through crisis, whether it's this long, very overly long pandemic crisis, but it could be just the crisis of having fraud on somebody's account, or crisis that our customer is dealing with, that they have a new opportunity, and if they don't have an answer in the next 10 minutes, they might miss the chance. So crisis comes in all sorts of different shapes and forms, and Independent Bank, we like to make sure that we're leading for our employees and what they are going through in crisis, but also our customers and what we can do to help their crisis get a little bit less. So we're very excited to always be a part of this group, and we learn something each time, and I hope you do as well. Thanks again.
Thank you, Linda. And once again, thank you and everyone at Independent Bank who's been the prime sponsor of the Chamber Small Business Council since its kickoff too many years ago. So thank you very, very much. I'm glad you're joining us today. Again, thank you all for being here for the Small Business Council Presents Leading Through Crisis. Just to remind ourselves, the Small Business Council is created by small business for small business to empower Memphis businesses with resources to address their needs. We collaborate with our think tank leaders and our think tank members to brainstorm with topics that are most impactful for you, our small business leaders. We create the opportunity for members to share and learn from their peers and connect with small business owners to the Small Business Council events. I'd like to recognize a few of our Small Business Council think tank members who are with us today. Amy Austin of Austin Interiors. Ooh, and I know I'm going to forget somebody. Patricia, can you help me remember who else from the think tank is here today with us?
Dottie, we also have coming in, we have Clark Butcher of Victory Bikes, and we also have someone that's trying to come in. I don't see them right now, so they're continuing to come in. So we really want to thank everyone on the think tank for being a part of this event.
Thank you very much. Those think tank volunteers are just like me. Small business and the leadership of small business is our passion, and we know that small business drives our economy. Well over 80% of the chamber members are small businesses. Now, leading through crisis. The think tank, when we got together the very first time, we know that we have been met with crises of all kinds this year. The pandemic, the financial crisis, the disparity crisis. This country has been in turmoil. And how do we as leaders manage our teams, our staffs, and ourselves? So it is my pleasure to introduce two people whom I know, thank goodness, very well now. Dr. Mikkel Harris, a licensed pediatric and family health psychologist currently serves in the private sector here in the Mid-South, offers psychological evaluation and support to children, adolescents, and families. She specializes in coping and with adjustment to acute chronic illness, grief, and health-related trauma. In her spare time, she enjoys writing, traveling around the globe, and has recently authored a memoir, Relaxing into the Pain, Her Journey into Grief and Beyond. It's been my pleasure to have Dr. Harris lead us in several discussions in the last few months, and I find her absolutely spellbinding. And Judy Bell of Judy Bell Consulting. Judy is an executive coach who provides positive support and leadership advice to anyone. She's an exceptional team builder. Judy is a former vice president of human resources with a couple of companies here. We've had the joy of working together for more years than we want to say out loud. And Judy and Dr. Harris, I'm going to turn the program over to you to teach us how to lead through crisis. And thank you all so much.
Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Harris, as Dottie shared, and I just want to take a few moments to thank the people who work just honestly behind the scenes to help Judy and I get ready for today. They're the ones who tell us what to do, what to say, when to show up, and how to show up. And so I want to give a special thanks to Tunja, Patricia, and Dottie. Thank you so much for helping to lead this conversation and frame it, and really set the stage for a topic that is truly so relevant during this time. So with that, I'm going to share the screen. Okay. Want to make sure everyone can see that well. Is that good? Okay. So Judy and I, first, before we start our presentation, want to get you all fired up and excited about engaging within the world of social media. You can see next to our names and our credentials are our Twitter handles. And so if you would mind taking a moment just to click on your Twitter page and keep the energy going. Not only is that helpful for the Memphis Chamber, but also to spread the word about the wonderful conversations like this that are important to have within our community. So again, Judy's is at judybell.dotcom, and I am at Dr. Mikkel. All right, Judy, did I miss anything for introductions there?
Well, and the chamber is at Memphis Chamber.
Thank you. Yes. And so once you get over there, you'll see that we already started tweeting a little bit behind the scenes. So thank you, Judy, so much. All right. So with that, let's share our overview for today, just to kind of give you an idea of where we're going to be going throughout the next few moments. We're going to start off really with a reflection, and I'll guide us through this journey that we've all been on throughout the past almost year and a half. So we'll reflect a little bit on the journey. Judy and I will both talk about why it's important to name some reminders as leaders, as managers. And then we'll get into the nitty gritty, reminding you what you may already know and bringing to light some things you may not know by addressing some of the challenges that are facing us from an emotional perspective, a physical health perspective, and many other arenas. We'll shift into how to focus on wellness, which is really why we're here, to help give us some tools, as Dottie articulated, not only for our staff, and the people that you may be leading, but most importantly for yourselves. We'll talk about what resilience is. And then finally, we'll have an opportunity to do some wrap up and Q&A. So Dottie is already comfortable and familiar with my presentation style and Judy's. And so we love a conversation. And so we want to invite you, should you have any thoughts or things that feel really profound as we start this morning, feel free to do that or type your comment in the chat box and we'll be sure to address it. But again, at the end, we'll have a dedicated time for wrap up and Q&A. So with that, I would love for you, no matter where you are, to take a moment, settle into your seats. I know it's early in the morning or midday right now. We're kind of getting into the groove of things. And some of you have entered this presentation perhaps with many things on your mind. If you've paid attention to social media and the news in the past 2 days, there's a lot happening in our communities. So I want you to take this opportunity as we kind of reflect on the past and bring us through today to feel settled, know that you are in a safe space, and feel comfortable in doing that. So I want us to start. We're going to look at this by going row by row from top to bottom. So let's start the journey. In December 2019, if you were like me, you were bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, excited for what was on the horizon for 2020. Perhaps you were at a New Year's Eve festivity, maybe at church, or maybe just settled into the comfort of your own home in your pajamas, anxiously waiting for that infamous countdown, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year, right? We were all excited. January was thrust upon us. And again, this was a point where we all started to think about what is the journey going to look like this year? For many of us, that included goal setting, writing things out, making plans, and thinking about what we were going to do professionally, emotionally, spiritually, and otherwise to make 2020 be the best year yet. And so we started making those plans. What we didn't know, we're on the second row here, was that looming behind the scenes, beneath the surface, was a virus. Starting in Wuhan, there were some things happening that the world had not yet known. There was a virus that we now know of as coronavirus, and the World Health Organization in late February, early March, stood on a platform and said, yes, we know that there is a virus here. We know that we've spotted this in different countries around the world, but at that point, it wasn't deemed a global threat. It wasn't until really mid to late March that the World Health Organization stood before us yet again and said, yes, this not only is a virus that is localized, but we know that it is spread, and we are now deeming this a global pandemic, which led a lot of us emotionally and individually and from an organizational perspective to full stop. For a lot of organizations, there was full-on panic. For a lot of individuals, there was full-on panic. We know that this resulted in business closures, schools shutting down, shifts in the way that we were functioning day to day. Our world as we knew it literally came to a full stop, despite the fact that there were so many dominoes falling one by one, moment by moment. Because of that, that led us to shift our attention to prevention and to management of this disease. And we all know we probably have tens, maybe 20. I was telling Dottie earlier, I have about 60 masks. We started wearing masks every day to every location. Hand sanitizer became more important to us than our day-to-day normal objects in our homes. And then we were asked to socially distance. The Centers for Disease Control recognized the importance of us spending at least 8 feet at the time, and then it reduced to 6 feet to help prevent and reduce the spread of coronavirus. This was roughly in May. So our world stopped. We're all trying to navigate what it feels like to socially distance in an environment where social connection is how we are wired. It's fundamental to the fabric of who we are, yet we were having to close our doors, insulate ourselves inside of our homes, and separate ourselves from family, friends, and coworkers. Throughout the summer, the message to keep your social distance persisted, and we were able to experience the summer in many different ways. 4th of July didn't look the same as it typically does. And the summer of graduations and barbecues and summer outings and so many other things were at a standstill. This led us roughly to July. We're on the 3rd row now. July to August 2020. By this point, we were about 5 months in, and there was a recognition with all the business closures and things that had come to a halt that economically, right, we were experiencing a lot of different challenges. We weren't able to get those economic surges because businesses were closed. Businesses that had been thriving for months, for years in our communities were shutting down, leading people who only had that as a source of income to look at many other avenues to support their families. And to be honest, that continues through today. We know that in addition to the economic and social ramifications of COVID-19, there are also physical health crises, obviously, leading many people, for some of us, loved ones, our friends, our coworkers, our church members, to experience hospitalizations and unfortunately deaths. And at this point, we have exceeded over 500,000 individual deaths. And that doesn't even count the ripple effect for families and communities as a whole. This led us to really take stock of who we were as a community, as a society, as a nation, to take those moments to mourn. And I say all of this against another backdrop of social and political divides and community deaths that heighten the awareness that we are all experiencing grief on some level. If you were like me in the fall, you might have been sitting there hanging your head thinking, oh my God, what else is going to happen this year? And that was a question that we prematurely asked because 2020 continued to unfold the answer to that in ways that we were not excited about. Many of us were up in the middle of the night staring at our clocks thinking, oh, do I have to get up and do this again? What's going to happen tomorrow? How am I going to support my family? What am I going to do to support my own mental health? Insomnia became the norm rather than the exception. We know that as these things catapulted, we were also in the middle of a political journey, right? This political process. So October, November, we're sitting here scratching our heads, wondering how are we going to get through this against the backdrop of these two major crises already at play. In December, as I thought about leading into 2021, was baffled in my mind, thinking there's no way that 2021 can be any worse than 2020. And there were many things swirling in my mind. I'm walking this tightrope of showing up and being able to show up and figuring out how to best show up in a virtual environment. How do we celebrate birthday parties on Zoom? How do we facilitate connection and meaning and relationships through drive-by birthday parties? So many things baffling our mind, leading us, many of us in January of this year, to feel stuck and paralyzed, uncertain what we're going to do. As leaders, I'm sure many of you, as you reflected on 2020, may have experienced that sense of paralysis, wondering, how can I continue to lead my organization well? How can I continue to support my family and my kids who've been at home for 365 days almost at this point? What can I do? And then came snowpocalypse. The Mid-South was riddled with a snowstorm that not only made us sink deeper into this sense of isolation in this bubble, but we literally couldn't go anywhere on top of not being able to connect in the ways that we preferred. So here we are. For a lot of us, obviously we're on Zoom this morning, but for many of us, thank goodness the screens are off because you may be sitting there thinking, another Zoom meeting. Do I have to sit through another Zoom meeting? Fatigue has set in. So I want us to sit for a moment, and I would love for us to take literally 1 minute, not to reflect on this and think of the weight of it, even though we recognize that that is true. I want you to reflect on the fact that despite all of these happenings over the past 15 months at this point, that we're still here. So I want us to take a minute. I'm actually going to time this, and I want you to reflect not only on what you've gone through, but where you are today, emotionally, physically, spiritually. And then I want you to think ahead to where you hope 2020 will take you. So let's start that now. That was a little under a minute. And for many of you, that was the first vacation that you may have taken in a year. For others of you, that may have felt like the longest minute of your lives. What Judy and I hope that we can do throughout the remainder of our time together is help us focus on the past. We need the past to help anchor us and give us fuel for today, but also to help us forecast into the future so that we can actually lead through crisis in the best way possible. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Judy.
Thank you, Dr. Harris, and thank you for allowing us to get quiet for just a moment. I have a tweetable moment. So, or we have a tweetable moment. Get your Twitter finger ready. Is that like a trigger finger? But it's a Twitter finger. Write this on your heart or your shoulder, for your employees and your loved ones to see. What we hope to impart today is that balance is a myth. Harmony is a must. So, as Dr. Harris said earlier, we've been through a lot. We've had experiences of joy, and we've had experiences of sadness and stress. But, as humans, we just have to take that, balance it, and come out the other side stronger. And as leaders, we must remember not only to take care of ourselves, but we have others that we are responsible for. So I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Harris, and she's going to talk about the state. Actually, she's already talked about the state of the nation. So I'll talk with you about, things that we need to do. Conversations with employees. We need to remember that we must not let traditional privacy guidelines get in the way. The old adage was that we were not supposed to be involved in our employees' lives. That really was overkill. The HIPAA and the traditional privacy was mostly around health related matters. But a lot of managers and leaders are fearful to get involved at all. So, and that's not what we need to do as managers and leaders. We must embrace compassion and empathy every day, even pre-pandemic, but especially now that we're going through, all of the changes, which have not always been for the best, all of the grief. We need to certainly be involved with our employees, be aware of their situation. Are they homeschooling children? Ask them how they're doing. Ask those questions. Do they have loved ones in a nursing home? Remember, your employees are also mothers and fathers and sons and daughters and brothers and sisters. They're human beings. They're not just employees. So do they have loved ones in nursing homes? Do they have loved ones who have been impacted by any situation, but certainly by the health concerns of COVID? Um, have they experienced loss? This year brought a lot of loss, uh, of a Shakespearean proportion. I cannot imagine not being with your loved ones when they take their last breath. I absolutely cannot imagine. And we shouldn't have to imagine that, but we did. Um, do your employees have the necessary technology and equipment to do their jobs? We must ask those questions. Um, you know, Open dialogue with your employees. Don't put that hat on from the 70s, 80s, and 90s where, we compartmentalized our lives and it was either work or home. Those lines have been blurred for a long time because many of us realized, a number of years ago that employees don't check their home problems or situations, good or bad, even joy, at the door when they walk in the morning. And they also don't check their office problems at the office door when they leave in the afternoon, provided that they're working in an office now. So, we must engage, we must be aware of what's going on in our employees' lives. And then, have you experienced any of the above? Because first and foremost, before we're leaders, we also are uh, human beings. And we may be homeschooling children and have loved ones in nursing homes, have experienced loss and grief. So it's just important that, that we engage with our employees and that we have compassion and empathy. Okay, next slide, Dr. Harris. In today's environment, we must really engage. And that means we sometimes have to make an extra effort. What kind of work-related matters can you help them with? Are they having problems with productivity, with time management? I've worked with a number of people on the time management issues that they're experiencing. And it happens to the best of us because it's hard to keep all of those trains on the track. Um, do they have uh, what kind of technology needs do they have? Do they have the programs that they need? Do they have Wi-Fi? Another important matter where we need to be available to our employees is helping them set boundaries. Let them know that you don't expect them to be on 24/7, and then really live that. A lot of people, a lot of companies, SHRM has done some studies, which is the Society of Human Resource Management. Productivity is up in the country, which is kind of hard to believe. A lot of people would have assumed, I guess, that people working from home would not be as productive. And certainly there are pockets, where that is not the case. And I guess each one of us have days where maybe we're not so productive. But for the most part, productivity is up. Where we are struggling is that balance, is being able to, shut that door metaphorically, and leave it so that we can, go be a mother, spouse, community leader, whatever else it is that we're involved in. And so a little bit later this morning, we're going to talk about ways that we can help that happen. Help them set boundaries. Remind them again that it is not, 24/7. Remember their humanity. Remember that they have other things going on in their lives. And then back to what I said just a few moments ago, remember to keep personal conversations private. And that's where the privacy is so important. Again, we don't want to get into health related issues. If they want to share, you can listen. But for the most part, people will not be talking about the health. They'll be talking about stress related matters, family balance, personal needs, that sort of thing. And just listen, be there for them. But remember to keep anything that they share with us, remember to keep those conversations private. That's the key. That's part of the compassion of being a good leader, is keeping those conversations private, offering, your experience, offering them EAP perhaps, an employee assistance program, um, and getting them the help they need beyond what you can offer. Okay, next slide. And this is just that reminder, compassion and empathy, and that might be a tweetable moment. Compassion and empathy are the most important leadership values. Ask employees what they need. They may not be comfortable asking for help. A lot of people unfortunately see that as a weakness, and it is not. Raise your hand. And if you're an employee and you need help, raise your hand. Pick up that phone, call your manager, supervisor, your human resource department, and ask for what you need. As leaders, we need to model critical leadership values and keep your company's values in the forefront. I work with so many companies in Memphis, and even the ones I don't work with, I'm familiar with them because of my volunteer work with the chamber. And companies have their values up, and they're so interesting, and so deeply felt. And I don't know of any companies locally who are that I work with or that I'm familiar with that are not living their values every day. When in doubt, look at your values. They will guide every decision. Encourage engagement. You know, many times now we're not together as a team. So we need to encourage and have teamwork on purpose, which means, some fun on the Zoom meetings. We need to get creative, have contests, have funny masks. Here's my mask, and it doesn't qualify as a COVID mask because it's just a mask from a masquerade party. But have fun. I'm the only one in the room right now, so it doesn't matter if I wear my Mardi Gras kitty cat mask. So have fun, engage, encourage your employees to engage. I hear a lot of people that will have a breakfast or a coffee meeting on Zoom, or a happy hour meeting, or a Friday afternoon meeting where they wear, sweatshirts and, for their favorite teams. Of course, it's March Madness right now, so be a good time to have a little fun with that. And most of all, be engaging. That's not just showing up. Engagement, fully engage. Show your employees that you're human too. With all of our, we're frail. We're all frail. In fact, 2020 taught us about vulnerability and humanity more than, I think, in overabundance. And that can be a good thing because it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to realize that we're all a part of the same race. Dr. Harris talked just a minute this morning about grief. And of course, we've had more than our fair share in all sorts of ways. But then, the shooting in Atlanta, and then the shooting yesterday in Colorado. And gosh, there's earthquakes, there's tsunamis, there's floods and fires, and grief looks the same all over the world. You can see those snapshots of people in other countries, even third world countries, and their faces don't look any different than ours. We're all part of that humanity, and 2020 really taught us that. Okay, ready for the next?
All right, Judy, thank you so much for just kind of laying the frame for our leaders and helping them to realize that the importance of connecting with employees, remaining empathic, leading with vulnerability, as well as being engaging in a time where engagement is pretty tricky. So thank you for sharing a few examples of what that might look like. So we wanted to shift gears and really provide kind of a state of the nation, just to anchor us from a mental health perspective, and then I'll also share some physical and financial data to help us understand where we are at this moment and where we were in 2020. So aside from over 500,000 United States Americans to date dying as a result of COVID, as well as the subsequent losses in their families, COVID-19 has truly taken a toll on mental health. Here we see some data from the Centers for Disease Control and the US Census Bureau that talk about spikes in depression and anxiety. So I want you to take a look at this for a moment. You'll see that the data in yellow are noting January through June 2019, so before we were even aware of coronavirus and its impact. The red there charts May 14th through 19th, 2020, and then December 2020 is in purple. So you can see that before the pandemic, the state of our mental health in the nation wasn't great to begin with. Roughly 8% of the population experiencing symptoms of anxiety disorder. I will say that I think this is a bit of an underestimate. And that tends to be the case when we're looking at data such as these, just given the fact that it's self-report. So 8% symptoms of anxiety disorder, 6% of folks were noting before COVID-19 symptoms of depression and depressive disorder. And then you could see that basically 1 out of 10 people were noting symptoms of anxiety or depressive disorder combined. When we kind of flash forward and look at May 2020, you can see the stark increases in those percentages. For example, with anxiety, we went from 8% to 28% of people noting anxiety, from 6% to 24% of people noting depressive disorder, and then 33.9% for people noting symptoms of both. So tremendous leaps in mental health issues. Then when we shift into December 2020, right? So we're 9 months into this pandemic, we can see again a stark jump. So from 28 to 36% for anxiety, 30%, and then 42% for these issues combined. So this is definitely something that is not just isolated to what we might consider mental health individuals, right? This is affecting all of us. And I always love to share that we all fall somewhere on the continuum. You may not meet criteria for a depressive disorder or anxiety disorder, but I will say that more than likely you've noticed some differences in the way that you are experiencing your mental health, which is natural because we've been in this state of isolation, social distancing, and all of our normal daily rhythms. Even things as simple as being able to get up, drive across town to work, and come back home. While it was annoying then, that was part of a rhythm that we had engaged in for so long. And not having that, having to house with our families for 24 hours a day, we can see that these numbers are up. I do want to make a note here that I don't have a slide for it, but it just dawned on me that not only are we experiencing these spikes with depression and anxiety, but also with regard to intimate partner violence. So this becomes important because obviously if we're having folks who are employees working from home, there are probably employees who you have in your organizations who are at increased risk, who've had to spend the past year in a home with a person who is a perpetrator. And because of COVID-19, some of the safe havens that were in place, like domestic violence shelters and so forth, have been closed because of concerns about social distancing. Well, we can see that that is increasing risk for people. And subsequently, these people are showing up on Zoom calls without us really having a full picture. So just to keep those things in mind, that what we see is not always what it is. And as Judy was saying, to take those steps to really have conversations that may be difficult, but to lean into those conversations so that we can truly appreciate what is happening in the workplace. Wanted to share some additional data. This is from June 2020. Here we can see the percentage of US adults with adverse mental health symptoms, increased substance use, or suicidal ideation during the pandemic. So on the far left here, about 13.3% of people, and again, this is US specific, started or increased substance use to cope with pandemic-related stressor emotions. Now, I want to make a little bit of a caveat. We often in pop culture and community kind of laugh about, oh, I'm going to go home and whine and chill, right? And this is something, that a lot of folks do, including myself, to relax or unwind at the end of the day. However, we have to be mindful of this because not only are we working, but we're at home. And I mentioned just with the increased isolation, that can create an environment where people are feeling even more stressed without having a plausible or healthy escape. So to be aware that with employees, they may be drinking more and using drugs to cope with the strain of work and life flow. 10% of people seriously considered suicide in the past 30 days. This was June 2020. And I was searching for data that I could not find to get a closer pinpoint of what's going on in 2021. That will probably become available in the next couple of months. But 10% seriously considering suicide in the last 30 days. My guess is that this number is probably higher now that we are continuing to experience the consequences of social isolation, economic downturn, and many other things. And then, similar to the other data, about 41% of folks are noting that they are experiencing one or more adverse mental health outcomes. So you may be thinking, well, Dr. Harris, why are you bringing this up for leaders? Well, I would venture to say that there are probably folks in this space, in this room, who fall into one of these categories. And so not only do we have to be aware of this for our employees, but it's equally important that we take stock of ourselves. And Judy and I are going to talk about some ways to do that in just a moment. These are some data, oh, and I apologize, it's a little bit more blurry, but these are some data that look at the long-term impact of COVID-19 on mental health. So if you look at Tennessee, I think you can still see where we are. The darkest blue, which Tennessee is, has the highest number, the highest quantities of COVID-19 infection rate. And then the lighter blue, for example, the northeastern portion of the country, and then over here up near Seattle and Washington, these have the lower COVID-19 infection rates. This was as of December, so this data has shifted somewhat. But you can see that in Tennessee, we are up there, right? We have high infection rates, and this matters because while we are thinking about what's happening from a national level, your businesses, my business is in this state. And so it's important that we be aware of what's happening from an infection rate, because as we said, there are so many short and long-term consequences of these infections. I also wanted to highlight this. Okay, so while Tennessee is in the higher rates of infection for COVID-19, we're also in the highest quartile of mental health provider shortage. So think about that, right? We know that COVID-19 has created a space where people are experiencing worse mental health outcomes. We know that the risk of suicide is higher, the risk of intimate partner violence is higher, the risk of substance use is higher. Yet, when we look at the availability of folks like myself who are available to manage these consequences, we have a shortage issue. And the last time I checked, it was roughly about 2%. Now I'm only speaking of psychologists, 2% to compare 2% availability for the state for mental health coverage. Let that sink in for a minute. If we look at the sheer numbers of people experiencing issues, there's just not enough people to address it. And so I think what this means is that as an organization, as a leader, we've got to get creative. We've got to get creative around how we are addressing and identifying symptoms of mental health and other adverse outcomes in the workplace. We've got to get creative about how to engage, as Judy was talking about, with regard to employee assistance program, linking arm in arm, considering peer support options. We've really got to think out of the box, because the stark reality is there is not enough mental health provider coverage to address the mental health outcomes in this state. So I'm hopeful that as we shift into the Q&A, that this can become part of the conversation that we have, and that we can put our heads together to think about how we can best serve our individual organizations, but also connect with one another to do so as well. I wanted to provide a little bit of data here. Judy mentioned these, kind of touched on it, but I did want to talk about, in addition to the mental health issues that I named, there have also been increases in health worries. So by training, I'm a health psychologist. And what that means is I'm really fascinated between this link between mental health outcomes and physical illness. And what we know is that as mental health consequences rise, as people are experiencing depression, anxiety, and other things, guess what? They are experiencing physical health consequences. So throughout 2020, the increases in primary care visits went up, even via telehealth, by about 20 to 30%. So folks who necessarily weren't engaging their primary care physicians now were calling. And when we look at the types of things that people were setting up visits for, myself included, they were things like headaches, gastrointestinal upset, nausea, and sleep disturbances, which we're going to talk about in just a moment, as well as fatigue. So think about this. We are stressed, right? We're trying to muscle our way through this situation, yet we're not able to connect with people as readily as we could. So of course, it makes sense that we have more tension buildup, headaches, fatigue, all of these things I named. We've talked about the loneliness and isolation that 2020 and even 2021 has brought. And it's important that we really get creative about how to do this. I love that Judy talked about the masquerade connections and trying to have fun to create an environment in a virtual space that people do feel connected, which is so important. I think we always have to balance the difficulty that comes with Zoom fatigue and connection, right? All of us are probably tired on some level of staring at the little green dot on the computer screen. At the same time, it's that very dot that serves as a portal for us to be able to connect with folks in a safe way at this time. Wanted to share some data with regard to financial strain. I pulled up some statistics. I'll just go through about 5 facts. So overall, small business revenue since January, of 2020 is down 20%, and that number has indeed risen in some ways. Chapter 11 bankruptcies have increased over the past year. New business formations have fallen off. However, they're actually on track to outpace in the coming spring with some shifts. Layoffs and shutdowns, as we mentioned, are prevalent, and then the number of labor force participants not at work quadrupled from January 2020 until now. So these are stark data. I'm always fascinated by finances. I am not a lover of money, but I'm fascinated by the impact of money on our mental health. And so in 2018, I wanted to share that the average household, every time I read this and every time I think about this, I'm always a little startled. The average household did not have $400 to be able to respond in face of crisis in 2018. So I'll repeat that. The average household did not have $400 to be able to respond in the face of a crisis. That was 3 years ago. Now, over 69% of those with job or wage losses have reported serious financial issues, including an inability to save. So the bottom line here with regard to financial strain is that we haven't been in a great place in the past. And all the pandemic did was raise to the surface the financial strains and challenges that families are facing all throughout this country. So Judy and I were talking about this next bullet, work-life balance. And you'll notice that I put this in quotes. And one of the things that we talked about behind the scenes is this really is a misnomer. When you think about balance, I think in visual forms. And so I was telling Judy that when I think about balance, I think of a seesaw. And something in perfect balance is just this. Things are perfectly lined up, right? We are able to spend time at work and engage that environment, and at the same time, spend time with our families and do that well. Well, we've never really been able to do that, right? Instead, the quote that Judy shared earlier, which is another tweetable moment, is that balance is a myth, but harmony is a must. This is a quote from Lisa Nichols, and it's so profound because I think that one of the things that drives our poor mental health is continuing to align with this lie that work and life can be balanced. That's not true. And in a moment, we'll talk about how to shift our mindset with regard to this so that we can better engage our work in the midst of being at home, right? None of us spends 50% of our day working from our homes and 50% of our time engaging with our families in our home. So we've got to really dispel that myth so that we can actually lower the burden on ourselves and experience relief knowing that we're human. We don't have to keep all the balls up at the same level. We don't. And as a matter of fact, we really can't. So we'll come back to addressing that myth shortly. Judy and I also talked a lot about sleep. So if you were not aware, sleep, insomnia, and other sleep-related disorders are the most underdiagnosed mental or physical health crisis in this country. It's not something that you will turn your TV on and probably hear. But if you look at the impact of poor sleep, mental health, it shows up in our bodies. It affects our productivity. It affects our engagement. All aspects of our lives are impacted by sleep. And so at the end of our presentation, we're going to share not only a PDF of our presentation itself, but a handout focused on sleep hygiene, right? We want to help our employees and we want to help ourselves really clean up our sleep domain, because if we can sleep, number one, we can have more clarity, right? I know when I don't rest, it's very difficult for me to wake up and concentrate and focus on what I need to do. When I don't sleep, I'm a lot more crabby, and the people around me are praying that I take a nap, right? When I don't sleep, it shows up in my body in the form of all the ways that we've talked about before. So sleep is an incredibly important issue that we'll talk more about. And then finally, productivity challenges. So I wanted to give you a framework, especially as you think about your employees, right? The people who you lead, by reminding you of this fight, flight, or freeze response. If you have a pen, I want you to take it out so you can jot down some quick notes, right? So In the face of stress, each of us responds in one of really 4 ways, right? I'll hold off on the fourth one until we get to the end of our presentation. So the first one is to fight, okay? So we've all thought about us as this animal in the wild. This bear is approaching us, and for many of us, it's going to turn on the I'm going to beat you up, I'm going to fight, I'm going to engage, right? For others of us, it's to flee. This is the flight part of our stress response. Now, if I am in front of a bear, I'm going to run. Actually, they tell you not to run, but I probably would anyway. So the fleeing, and then finally the freezing, which is that paralysis. So again, you may be wondering, why in the world is Dr. Harris talking about bears and fight, flight, freeze in this presentation? Well, I want you to think about how this might show up in the workforce, okay? So let's imagine that in the face of 2020 and everything that your employees have faced, they are in fight mode. What this might look like is the employee who's showing up, okay? They're coming to the Zoom calls. They are almost overly engaged, right? They may be the ones who are overactive. They may be the ones who are dominating. So you might assign your teams to, or you assign your employees to teams, and you might notice that every time Judy shows up, she's showing up in this way that's dominating. She's not really letting people talk. She is taking on the task without really seeking input. She looks great on the surface, but it's really in a controlling fashion. No offense, Judy. I know you're not like that. But that's how an employee in fight mode might show up. You may be showing up in a fight mode. On the contrary, if your employee is showing up in a flee mode, the flight mode, they may turn on the Zoom camera or they may not, right? They may show up, but really not have a lot to offer. So you might notice lower energy and engagement, right? Their screen's on, but they may be sitting there, with their head on their hand. They may be looking at the screen, appearing dazed, right? Or they may provide a response in a meeting. However, it's not really fresh. It's nothing new. They may be piggybacking on other people's comments, right? Because their stress response is so high that they really don't have much to give in that moment. And then finally, our folks who freeze. Freezing can look like I'm really just here. I'm not really engaging. I'm not piggybacking. I'm definitely not fighting. I'm really just here. Or instead of coming on the computer, I might just turn on the phone while I'm laying in bed, really. And that is a way of that person managing that stress, really feeling paralyzed to be able to do anything. So as you think about your teams and your employees, not that you're going to necessarily plug them into a category, but I definitely want you to be mindful because as we become aware of our employees, that gives us information because now, as Judy mentioned earlier, we can engage them and have conversations. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Judy.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Harris. All great information. So we've talked a lot about how, what 2020 brought, what the early months of 2021 have brought us, and, the various emotions and problems that have come with that. Now we're going to talk for just a moment about recognizing burnout. Burnout is up now this is the HR Executive Magazine, March 2021, just came out. This is their statistic. It is up by 72%. I think if we could see a show of hands, which we can't on this Zoom call, I think a lot of people were already experiencing burnout before this pandemic hit. It has just been magnified. And, as much as I think all of us would like a redo on 2020, I think, again, there were lessons to be learned. And as with anything that's good or bad, if you can take the a lesson away or a few lessons away, that humanity and compassion and, just care of oneself and others is that lesson to be taken away, as well as gratitude. But burnout is a state of emotional, mental, and often physical exhaustion brought on by prolonged or repeated stress. And of course, as I mentioned, that happened long before the pandemic, but was certainly magnified over the last 12, 14 months. It's most often caused by problems at work, but it can, appear in other areas of our lives, such as parenting, caretaking, or the marriages and romantic relationships. The problems over the last year were that those lines were all blurred, and your work, your parenting, your caretaking, and your romantic relationships were all in one big, hairy bundle, with not a lot of delineation. So, a lot of blurred lines. Next slide, please. And so let's take a moment to think about professional burnout. It's caused by stress, and we've all experienced these. And the thing is these symptoms build on each other. There's fatigue, there's anxious feelings and thoughts, which leads to insomnia. And then when you don't sleep well, and when you're restless or don't get any sleep, you become irritable or you have outbursts. You eat more or less. You lack that enthusiasm and joy. You're just kind of flat or numb. And I just don't think anybody would agree that that's the way we're supposed to live. We need those, we need that enthusiasm. We need that joy. We need to look forward to eating in a restaurant with a linen napkin, Dottie. And then there's purposeful isolation. A lot of us were isolated unintentionally. But there are times when people will purposely isolate. And that's what we need to be aware of, not only in ourselves, but with our employees and the people that we lead. If it's an introvert, you may not worry so much. But if it's an extrovert on your team, or if you're an extrovert and you find yourself purposely isolating, missing Zoom calls, missing those Friday afternoon fun, fun calls, that's a time to worry. That means that there may be some depression creeping into this professional burnout. The detachment from the things that you used to enjoy, and then negativity and cynicism. And that's one we really need to be careful of. A lot of people will do what I call as awfulizing. And, that's where their mind goes to the worst case scenario on a regular basis. And, you might have, if you're traveling to work now, you might have traffic that's a little bit heavier than normal, or get behind two school buses, and then you say, oh, my whole day is shot, or my whole week is ruined. No, it's really not. It was just an inconvenience, and we need to remember that we don't need to awfulize. That's just not healthy. And then there's another one, and the professionals are calling this doom scrolling. And that's where you're hooked in too much to the news, particularly social media, because everybody's an expert on social media. Just ask them, and they're really not. And a lot of times there's that negativity and that cynicism on social media. Of course, if you're watching the real news on the networks, it was also doomsday, and it was really scary. It still is. And I know, even I consider myself a fairly wise person most days, or most parts of most days. But I got tangled up, about this time last year, maybe the last week of March, first week of April, and I had read, I get all sorts of newspapers and magazines and emails and newsletters. And of course, I was watching the news and I was bombarded with tragedy and those horrible refrigerated trucks in New York that was storing bodies because there wasn't room, and it was one number after another after another, and it was just tragic. And I was just overwhelmed. It was too many days of it. And I told my girlfriend, I said, I feel like I'm going to lose my mind. She said, Judy, turn your television off. And it's like, boom. I mean, how simple and succinct was that? Judy, turn your television off. Well, I turned my television off for several days. And I mean, that was so simple, but it was so simple, I couldn't even see it. I was entangled, I was caught up in it, and we need to be careful of doom scrolling because that is not healthy. Just turn your television off and get out of social media for a minute. In fact, I heard a lot of people have given it up for Lent, so I think that's probably a pretty good idea. Okay, next slide, please, Dr. Harris. Health problems. Our immune system suffers when we're under stress, and in the workplace we see a lot of absenteeism, particularly around quarter end. If you're working in the financials, and it just depending on what business you're in and what your cycles are, when people are working lots of hours and there's a lot of stress on them, tax season for accountants, we manifest these stressors as health problems. There's increased bouts of colds and flus, shortness of breath, heart palpitations. That's that anxiety. We hope it's just anxiety and not, a condition that's even more serious with the heart. There's dizziness, you have blood sugar problems, fainting, stomach issues, as Dr. Harris mentioned earlier, the gastro problems. There's skin issues and outbreaks. If you watch any television lately, it seems like every other commercial is for eczema or psoriasis or Breva for fever blisters and that sort of thing. So many of those skin conditions are the manifestation of stress, and that's how our body deals with it. So, next slide. So we're going to just move quickly because at the end of the presentation, Dr. Harris is going to introduce us to a very important person. And I know that you all will enjoy meeting him. So we need to focus on well-being, focus on a healthy and balanced diet. For most of us, that's going to be Mediterranean, but we all have different body compositions and we metabolize differently. So the main thing is to know what foods and fuel your body needs and needs to avoid. But first and foremost is that water. And then sleep hygiene. Look at that little fella there. Isn't he the cutest thing? We do need those healthy sleep habits, and we need bedtime rituals. We need to turn the electronics off so that we can start telling our body and our mind to rest. We need the dark, cool rooms. Dr. Harris is going to share with everyone in our toolkit. She has a wonderful handout on sleep hygiene. So we just need to be aware of our sleep habits, going to bed at the same time every day, getting up at the same time every morning, and keeping that schedule even on the weekends. And then there's meditation, prayer, and spiritual focus. We need time to be quiet. We need time to quiet our mind. That's when we get some of our best ideas. That's when our body rests and rejuvenates, and our minds, a lot of times just closing your eyes can give you the benefits of actual sleep. Uh, Even a 20-minute nap. In fact, especially a 20-minute nap. You don't want those hour and more long naps, because that will make you groggy and will impede your sleep at night. But meditation, prayer, spiritual focus, whatever it is that can quiet your mind and your body and give you that connection outside of yourself. Physical movement, this is one that is really important. Of course, we've got the ladies there with their hula hoop. Gosh, if my life depended on it, I don't think I could do a hula hoop anymore. I tried, and if you hadn't tried lately, it's harder than you remember. You don't forget how to ride a bicycle, but you do forget how to do a hula hoop, I promise. Or this person did. But jumpstart your endorphins with that physical movement, whether it's gardening, walking, going to the gym, whether it's participating in sports, whatever it is that will jumpstart that metabolism and keep your body moving. And then there's social and emotional connections. It's so important. Humans must have the social connection. I've heard, for years, the studies show that in nursing homes, just the presence of pets, a dog usually, and even house plants in a nursing home improves the wellness of the patients there, because there is that connection that is so important. And rest, and we need to explore what that means for us. It might mean 9 hours of sleep. It might mean 6 hours of sleep at night and a 30-minute nap. It might be just quiet time. It might be reading a book. It might be listening to music. There's all sorts of ways that we can rest and turn that chatter off and turn that physical activity off. And another thing, one thing that I didn't put on here, and I originally had it in my notes, and I don't know how it got left off when I wrote it, but what should be the seventh is nature. And nature is so critical, whether it's the beach, whether it's the ocean, whether it's hearing the waves, whether it's the mountains. A lot of people, when we had that snowstorm, were posting on Facebook how they were taking care of their birds, and people were posting pictures of their birds eating and visiting, and just gave themselves a lot of joy, and it gave others a lot of joy. I enjoyed watching that. Another, if you're if you're on Facebook and active, Bluff City Blooms is a house plant enthusiast Facebook page, and it's not only educational. You can post your plant and say, what is this, or what's wrong with it, and all of these local people will give you advice, but it's also funny. There are women that post on there that their husband, accused them of buying a new plant, and they said, no, I already had it, I just moved them around. So there's a lot of fun on there, because people that are really getting into the house plants are a little bit addicted to it. One lady posted about a week ago, because it was right after the snowstorm, and she said, I went to Lowe's to get a broom, and then she put a picture of her car trunk, and there was probably a dozen house plants. So she didn't get her broom, but she got a bunch of plants. So that's a lot of fun, for people that really want to engage in that nature. Nature is important. Animals, the sunrise, the sunset is just so important. Okay, next slide. All right, so to help reduce some of this burnout from work and work around this seesaw, as Dr. Harris calls it. We can't keep it at the even keel. That's not even natural. You know, we're going to go back and forth. But one way to, or several ways to work on this, is to set up physical markers to help separate work from personal, because many of us are working in the home. When you walk out of your office, shut that door. If you have an office in your home, if you don't, shut your laptop or whatever it is, your whatever it is, your your notebook, shut it, power down your work programs, but make that delineation from work to your other life. Adjust the physical landscape. Keep your work files in one place, especially if you have a specially designated work office in the house. And if you don't, still keep your work files in one place and then put them up at night. Don't have them skewed about and strewn about, because it will keep you from being able to engage on the other side of your life. Consider the cues that you can give your brain, much like you do when you're going to sleep. You lower the lights go down outside in the sky, and hopefully, you don't have all the lights on in the home, and then you don't have all the green lights from the technology as it gets closer to bedtime. But, be intentional about setting up and changing those hats. That's what I call them. As a single mother raising two children, all of those years, I wore many hats, but the two most important were my work life and my children. And I had to be intentional, to set those boundaries and change that hat. And then just be aware of how much email is on your cell phone. I choose not to have email on my cell because I would probably never stop working. I can shut the laptop down and walk away, and almost out loud, or at least certainly to myself, I say, step away from the computer, Judy. And that lets me know that it's time to unplug. But I do keep my cell phone on because you just need to.
Judy,
But yes,
I don't mean to interrupt, and I don't want to cut our time short, but I know there are a couple of really
questions.
important
No,
things.
I'm through.
Okay,
I'm
good.
through. So the other thing is, think about your own tricks. Think about your own tricks and the things that you can do to, to train your mind to focus on that well-being. And that's it.
Thanks, Judy. I really love that you mentioned the word intention. And so we're going to spend the final part of our presentation focused on a framework that I think is really helpful for you. I won't spend too much on this slide. Judy and I got a little bit fascinated about looking at the origin of the word resilience. And so you can see they're highlighted. It's a Latin verb meaning to leap. So it's almost the ability to be able to leap again in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress, which we know we've all experienced. So I want to make sure we have time to talk about our practical tool. Here is my friend Oliver. I was introduced to Oliver earlier this year, and I wish I could take credit for the meeting, but I met him through a series of presentations and workshops elsewhere. So again, if you have a pen and paper, I would love for you to jot this down. And yes, we're going to share the slides, but please try to engage for a few minutes in a little bit of a practice with this, because it really can become a daily practical tool to help you. So Oliver, as you can see, is an acronym. And there are 6 parts to Oliver. The first is the O, which is to observe. Okay, so what are we talking about here? This is you taking personal stock of where you are, mind, body, and spirit. Okay, so as you write that O, even for yourself, maybe take a moment to jot down, what is your body telling you, right? Again, I mentioned that I'm a health psychologist by trade, and so I'm really fascinated with the body. And it's often something that we tend to ignore, right? How many of us have pressed through work in the midst of having a headache, or we know that our stomach's upset, but we keep moving anyway, or the list could go on and on. So the O is really important, to take that moment to observe. I will say that the whole framework for Oliver can be done in less than 5 minutes. So if you're thinking, oh no, they're giving me something else to do, I really want you to count this as a prevention. Just like you might wake up and take that multivitamin, Oliver can become a friend who you can engage with as a preventative to address these areas that Judy and I talked about throughout the presentation. After we take personal stock and do the O portion, then we want to listen. So here the question is, what am I saying to myself, right? The Bible says, as a man thinks, so is he. Our thoughts have incredible power on helping us walk this journey. And we know that 2020 was incredibly difficult. At the same time, we want to engage our thoughts differently. So as you ask this question, what's the answer? Are you saying, oh, I went through 2020, I can't take it anymore? Or are you saying, I made it through 2020, and because of that, I have fuel to move forward. I know that I can move forward because I've already dealt with this past 15 months. What are you saying to yourself? Notice that in these first 2 portions, there's no judgment. We're observing and just taking stock, naming things. We're asking and becoming aware of what our thoughts are driving us to do, but we're not judging ourselves at all, right? Because we all have many thoughts. The truth is, every single day, you and I have over 40,000 thoughts, okay? Anywhere from 40 to 60,000 thoughts. And guess what? The majority of them are negative, right? I don't know why God did that, but it's up to us, though, to take stock of and be aware of our thoughts. So we've observed, we've listened, then we're going to use this I portion. Here's where we're going to inquire. This is you asking questions of yourself. The first question, really important, which is, how am I really doing, right? How many times do we show up in the work domain with a smile on our face, with pretty makeup, ready to go, looking like we have it all together, and inside we are suffering, we are really feeling poorly, and we're not really owning that? Well, it's important to do that because it's hard for us to shift into that space of reaching out if we're not really being honest with ourselves. So the question for you this morning is, how are you really doing? And related to that, as you think about how you are coping, the things that you're doing in response to this ever-changing society, all of the stress, is what you're doing really healthy, right? So I want to make a quick note here just for you to be aware of. There's 2 camps that we kind of fall into with regard to how we respond to stress, right? Some of us go towards mindful activities, and some of us go to mindless activities. An example of a mindless activity may be video games. Nothing's wrong with video games, right? At the same time, it's not really a place where we're engaging what's happening with our mind, body, and spirit. We're just kind of hiding away to distract ourselves. Now, again, I'm guilty of this. It's nothing wrong with it, but we need to make sure we're not only doing mindless things. Another example is scrolling on our phones on social media. I'm also guilty of that. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but we need to take stock of how much time we're spending on mindless things versus mindful things, including the activities that Judy previously mentioned. So we've observed, listened, and inquired. Now we're going to validate. Earlier in the presentation, Judy talked about the need to offer compassion and empathy. And she was framing this within a context of giving it out towards our employees. I would argue that it's equally as important, probably more important, that we validate ourselves. Here's where you're offering self-compassion, right? You might be saying, I'm really not doing well, and I'm probably spending more time in these mindless things. And you know what? I'm going to give myself some grace. I'm going to acknowledge where I am, but be compassionate with myself, right? It's hard for us to shift behavior when we're beating ourselves up. It's probably darn near impossible. So the self-compassion is a critical piece of this process. Fifth, we're going to encourage ourselves. We're going to make positive and affirming self-statements. Here's an example. I might say something like, and this is probably true for me, 2020 was a year that I struggled in ways that I had not ever experienced. And I know that because of what I've gone through, I can keep moving, right? Notice that I'm not saying 2020 was really hard, but I'm a fighter, right? I really want you to think about language here. Language really does matter. So as you're thinking about the past and affirming yourself, acknowledge how you feel, right? This is where we fall into traps when we're thinking of only making positive statements. That's fine, but we have to name what's really going on, right? So it's okay for me to say, today's a hard day and X, Y, and Z. All right. So making sure that you're focusing on the language is really important here. And then finally, we're going to exercise the R part of Oliver, and that's reaching out, right? It's hard for us to reach out if we haven't done these 5 steps before. Why? Because we don't even know what we're asking for help about, right? We don't know how a person can meet us if we haven't taken personal stock, ask ourselves the hard questions, and then forgiven ourselves for maybe not being where we want to be. So what my hope is, and I shared this in another presentation with Dottie, take a moment after our presentation. Put Oliver on a sticky note, Oliver, write out the portions, and encourage yourself as you sit in front of the screen day by day to go through this process. I promise you, the 5 minutes that you take to do this is going to make you more available. And as a leader, it's going to empower you to help the people with whom you work do it for themselves.
And I hate to stop you because I
Yep.
know we're going to run short of time.
Yep.
We had 2 quick questions. And
Absolutely.
before everybody jumps off at 1 o'clock, I'm going to bring those questions up in 2 seconds. On the screen is both Judy and Dr. Harris's contact information.
Yes.
If you need them, please reach out. Take Oliver with you guys. He stays with me wherever I go now. As a reminder for everybody, for those who are jumping off for other 1 o'clock meetings, because I know we're 1 minute ahead, please keep your eyes and ears open. The next Small Business Council Lunch in the Know will be on April the 15th. Keep your eyes peeled. We're going to be having an an HR attorney and the EEOC talking about where we are and what we as business owners and leaders can do moving forward. A couple of quick questions.
Yes.
And this is hard. Michael Detroit asked, this is way back in the beginning, Tennessee numbers are one thing, but how does Memphis and Shelby County compare with those numbers that you gave us in the beginning? Are they the same? Are they worse? Are we like the rest of the state or the rest of the country, Dr. Harris?
Yeah, that's a great question. So up until December 2020, Memphis, Shelby County paralleled what was happening in the state with regard to those mental health numbers. I am continuing to fish out data to kind of find out where we are in March, but for the most part, we are roughly trending the same as the state, give or take 1 to 5%. And that's always the case with regard to statistical data. Mm-hmm.
And one other question, this one probably, since we have got 12 seconds left, but for those of you who can hang on, we're not going to knock you off. What are some ways to break those barriers if you've not connected? This is Judy, to start with you, and then back to Dr. Harris, to connect with employees, to make sure they're okay. And then Daphne Large, if you're still on, I'm going to ask Tundra to unmute you when they finish, because you have been able to connect and bring fun back into a remote workforce better than anybody that I've known. So Judy, some ways to break those barriers, and then back to Dr. Harris.
Well, I would start, first of all, with the next meeting, or well, actually today, and I would call a meeting and maybe call a Friday meeting and call it Friday Fun. And then, make certain that you're engaging on those Zoom meetings. Also schedule a one-on-one with each of your direct reports. And ask how employees are doing. You don't need the nitty gritty details, but I remember one time one of our employees had been diagnosed with cancer, and her manager didn't even send her a get well card at home. I asked her manager how she was doing, and she said, I don't know, I haven't talked to her.
Ooh,
And I said, oh my, oh my. And so, oh my. But be involved, be engaged, be aware, and then offer yourself. Let them be vulnerable, and then be engaging with them.
Dr. Harris?
Yeah, and I'll answer that by saying, kind of stealing a little bit of Brene Brown's vulnerability work. It's
Mm.
difficult for us to lead from a place where we are not being vulnerable, right? And I know sometimes as a leader, I am one. It's difficult to show up in a space and reveal that because we're concerned about how others might perceive our leadership. But I will say over and over again, as we lead with taking a small risk by saying, 2020 was hard for me too. It doesn't have to be nitty gritty personal issues, but it can be acknowledging and naming the difficulty of the season. Once we do that, it helps us more readily establish rapport and connect, and creates the space for people to do just the same.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Daphne, are you still there? And I don't know, Tundra, can you unmute her if she wants to talk just for 15 seconds about some of the things she's done with her employees? Here you are, Daph.
I am here, Dottie. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yay,
ma'am.
yeah, you can.
Hey,
Awesome. So thank you. Some of the things we've done, we hired a company to do a Zoom escape room. I was a little skeptical about how fun that would be. It was amazing. And, we had 100 and probably 30 people on, broken out into escape rooms. It was a race. It was a contest. Who could break out first? It was really cool. That was a lot of fun. We play bingo frequently with Visa gift cards. We do virtual bingo. We have a
Ooh,
caller. We generate electronic cards. It is a lot of fun. We've also done that with youth villages where we've played bingo with the kids and given them prizes. And so we're on Zoom. They can see us, but we can't actually see the kids for obvious reasons, but they're hooping and hollering and having a ball, right? And we do. I've started CEO bites where I talk to the group at least once a month, sometimes twice a month, on any topic they want, and we just talk about it. Sometimes it's teaching, sometimes it's just talking. A lot of fun. We also have started exercise groups. I'm actually leading it. I figured out the only way to get myself to exercise regularly is when I have to lead it. And so we do Zoom exercise with weights, and it's a lot. This is the ladies group, and it is actually a lot of fun. It's every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at noon, from about noon to 12:25. And believe it or not, DataFacts will survive, and their schedule will too, if they schedule around it and we make time for this exercise. And we feel better, and we're loving it.
Thank you.
And so it's just, you can get creative and do anything you want. Just do it.
Can
Thank
I
you
add
very
one?
much, Daphne.
I add one 10-second little thing here. I love those activities. I also want to highlight what Judy was talking about, which is rest. Having a mindful moment. We did that as part of this presentation. And I often hear that people have not sat and been still. And there is so much value in that. So even to embed something like that, to just allow people to sit and be with themselves, is really important for clarity and productivity.
Thank you all. And thank you all for staying a little bit late. I'd like to turn this back over to Patricia McKinney, our co-chair, and thank you all for attending. Patricia.
Thank you. Yes, thank you all so much for attending. We're going to give you your time back, but thank you so much, Dr. Harris and Judy Bell, for sharing with us. Again, have a great day, and keep your calendars. Dottie already talked about April 15th, so look out for that invite. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Everybody.